He is one of the hosts of the Complex Sports Podcast. We welcome Zion Olojede onto Hoopsology. How's it going, Zion?
Hey, how y'all doing, man? Appreciate y'all having me.
Thanks for joining us, Zion. Wanted to lead off kind of with your thoughts of the season overall. I mean, we know how the bubble went and we were able to avoid coronavirus spreading in the NBA. Obviously, this season, a different story. I mean, as things have spiked around the country, it's kind of mirrored in the NBA. What are your thoughts so far of the 2020-2021 regular season?
I mean, for me, I think I'm a little surprised at the fact, kind of like, although they've had their certain outbreaks with certain teams like the Wizards and a few other teams, I'm still kind of surprised that the NBA has gotten to this point without that big of an issue. Like, obviously, you're going to have your cases every now and then out there being a bubble and whatnot, but I mean, I think Shams just reported this week that, I mean, since the last update, there's only been one new case. So, I mean, I'm kind of surprised the fact, they're not in a bubble and they're still, being able to play the majority of their games.
Absolutely. And so would you say it's probably not dramatic enough, like at least to this point, that you would buy the notion that some people are saying that like this is an asterisk season or something like that? You feel like you're still getting good competitive basketball?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I don't think there's any asterisk behind it as of right now. I mean, I don't think ultimately there will be, but like realistically, look at the standings. I mean, besides a few outliers like the Heat, obviously they're not playing to the standards because they didn't have the roster, and I mean maybe the Raptors because they're playing in Tampa and that's uncertain circumstances. I mean, for pretty much everything else is normal. Like the Lakers are great, the Clippers are great, the Sixers are. I mean, the roster coming into the season, I expected them to be somewhere near the top, and they're at the top. I mean, obviously the Nets are what they are now. Celtics are still good, so I feel like we're still getting the basketball that we would have saw outside, with fans and in normal circumstances. But there are a few outliers, of course.
For sure.
Zion, you brought up the Brooklyn Nets a little second ago, and I want to focus on them. Now that we have some actual games to just really dissect how they mesh as a team, what are your thoughts on this new Big Three, and do you see them as a threat to win the title despite, how mediocre they are defensively?
I mean, this is going to be a very biased view for me because I am a Nets fan, and I've been a Nets fan before, like Brooklyn, and since they've been in New Jersey. So like this all for me is new. Kind of being looked at as the hunted instead of hunting. So like for me right now, I'm excited. I'm just excited that the fact that Kevin Durant and James Harden and Kyrie Irving are on our team and leading our team. That's just a blessing in itself. Obviously, there's a lot to work out. There's a lot. I'm not gonna lie. Defensively, they've struggled, and I think that will be shored up with some time and with some acquisitions. I know Sean Marks isn't done, but I mean, realistically, they haven't practiced that many times, maybe like two times at this point. And I mean, offensively, they still seem to. I mean, at the end of the day, they're going to be. Ultimately, they should be the best offense of the NBA by the end of the season. I mean, I don't think that should be in question. But I've liked what I saw so far. I mean, even last night, with Kyrie and Harden, that was like the best I've seen of them meshing. And the role players came to play as well without KD. I mean, scoring 147 points, that's a glimpse of what they can obviously not do nightly, but the realistic, view of their offense. So they're gonna score at will, and eventually when they all get on the same page, I think it's gonna be scary.
So Zion, since you mentioned you're a hardcore fan of the Nets, I want to pose this question to you because we had a guest on last week, and he's from the New Jersey
Mm-hmm.
area, and we were discussing, okay, now that the Nets have this big three, and the Knicks have just really fallen off over really the past like 20 years, with the Barkley Center opening fairly recently, last decade, there seems to be an opening for like a team overtaking the Knicks as the main, I guess, team in New York. So I guess when I ask, because compared to like the LA discussion between the Lakers and Clippers, that's pretty ridiculous. I mean, the Lakers have the
Yeah.
lineage. There's just no way. But with the Knicks, our guest was just going over how really overrated the franchise has been through the years. And with Brooklyn,
Yeah.
just with these big three, if they mesh and they happen to be together for a certain amount of time, you can build off of that no matter what happens with the team due to their prestige. So I guess I pose this question to you. Do you see Brooklyn perhaps just overtaking the Knicks as the number one team in New York over time if things go according to plan?
Well, my quick just question for y'all is where are y'all from?
Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense because even though it hurts me to say it, the Knicks will always run New York.
Mm.
Not run New York, but the Knicks will own New York as the face of basketball. It's hard to erase the history and the passion of Knicks fans that they built up for so long. It's just like it's nearly impossible to erase that. So like even now, I mean, if you check Twitter, you're gonna see even with the newspapers now, the Nets scored 147 points last night, and that
Mm-hmm.
was a record like in regulation for a team like that. And the Knicks are still on the back cover. Like the Knicks are still on the back cover of newspapers, getting all the headlines because of Emmanuel quickly like over Kyrie and Harden. Like that's just the nature of the city. It's always going to be that way. I think the way the only chance the Nets have of kind of like making a dent in it and it becomes maybe 50-50 is if they win one or two titles. And I think if that happens, New York tends to rally around teams that win championships. And I think if that happens, they have a chance. But realistically, it's as bad as you mentioned the Lakers and Clippers. It's kind of as bad as that. Just that the Lakers, obviously the Lakers win, but the Knicks their fans are so passionate and the franchise is so deep within the city. Like it's hard. It's hard to beat them.
And I just mentioned that because I've heard like other known Knicks fans like Michael Rappaport just like talk with such disgust about the New York Knicks, even though he's a fan of theirs. And just like, I think he was on a recent podcast with like All the Smoke, and he's just saying like, now I follow the Warriors and I follow all these other teams. I just don't really give a crap about the Knicks. So I just seem like there's a lot of disdain and just like anger just due to what's
Yeah.
happened with the Knicks recently. So that's why I just bring that up in terms of maybe there's just an opening. It seems all the pieces are aligned for, Brooklyn just to kind of take that shine away.
Yeah. Here's what I say about Knicks fans. They love to kill their own team. They love to kill their own team. But it's when other people start killing them that they defend the Knicks like crazy. That's just the nature of Knicks fans. Like they want to be the ones to to slander their team. They're not gonna let anybody else slander them.
Awesome. The another question I wanted to ask you about is a team that Justin and I have talked about a lot that's going to be contending with those Nets, most likely in the playoffs would be the Philadelphia 76ers. I wanted to get your thoughts. We know Joel Embiid is right now, it seems, the favorite to win the MVP. Of course, things can change, and we know there's injury history, things like that. But assuming he can keep his performance up, I guess one of the main questions Justin and I have had is if we think Ben Simmons can elevate his game to make them a legitimate contender in the East. What do you think of kind of Ben Simmons and his development? Maybe if he has any more room to grow to a higher ceiling as a player? And do you think the 76ers are like legit title contenders this year?
I mean, me personally, I it's always tough with them because I think obviously right now they're clicking. And I did say coming into this year, I think if there was a roster that would work best with Embiid and Simmons, I think it's this one, just because they're surrounding them with Seth Curry, Danny Green, Tobias. Now they have shooters around them for once, consistent shooters. I think that opens everything else up. With Ben Simmons, I don't know. I mean, I think he has the ceiling is high. Like the ceiling is incredibly high. I think obviously we all know the jump shot. When is he going to incorporate? And I think it's not even the 3-point jump shot. We don't need to see the 3-point jump shot yet. I think if he develops any type of mid-range consistently, I think that opens the game up dramatically. Like I just think that first would open up, their offense even more, and I think kind of make them unstoppable. And I think, Embiid, this is great. I love seeing this. I think this is the player he's shown, but he hasn't shown consistently. But come playoff time, the problem with Embiid is he doesn't want to touch the paint in the playoffs. Like he starts to reel off in playoff series. He'll start to reel off games where he's attempting 6-7 threes, and obviously he's not an efficient 3-point shooter, and it's just playing into the team's game plan, and the teams tend to beat him off that. But I think if there was a year for them to make it, it would be this year. Just because even as a Nets fan, we don't have anybody to guard Embiid. I mean, DeAndre Jordan can hold his own for a good 5 minutes. He picks up 2 fouls, we're done. I mean, with the roster we have now, unless we get Andre Drummond somehow or JaVale McGee, I don't think, we're built to stop Embiid. But I think also next year with the off season and a year for us to prepare, when I say us, the Nets, I think the Nets are going to dominate the East next year. But I don't know. I think their window is right now, and I think they have a team to compete and maybe get to the finals and maybe even compete with the Lakers. We saw what they did the other night. Even though I think the Lakers are coasting this season, but we'll see with them.
How much do you credit their success to like new front office with Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers? I mean, last year, Doc Rivers kind of got roasted on the way out of the Clippers, maybe rightfully so with what happened in the second round of the playoffs there. Do you think that, I know they have some new role players. Obviously, that roster does look pretty different compared to last year, but with the two main players being kind of the same, do you tend to, attribute their success more to that leadership or role players? I mean, it's impossible to maybe attribute a percentage to it, but what do you think of the job Doc has done this year?
See, that's tough because I think even with the Sixers struggles in the past, I think a big factor has been health. We saw it in the bubble, Ben Simmons getting hurt. And obviously Embiid has had his problems with being healthy. Realistically, the team with Jimmy Butler, if Kawhi, they're one bad shot away from, making it to the finals. Well, we're basically one possession away from making it to the finals or the East. Was that the Eastern Conference Finals or the semifinals? I'm blanking right now.
I think the semifinals last year, right?
I'm drawing a blank too.
Have to get out the Google.
Right.
With the Kawhi shot, but whatever, they were. I thought that was the year, even against the Raptors, that they probably should have won that series. Could have won that series. But I think the biggest thing with them is just staying healthy. I know Doc obviously is a new coach and Morey's there now, but I wouldn't even necessarily give them too much credit just because I feel like the Sixers are finally healthy and they finally have good pieces around. Like so many years that they haven't surrounded Ben Simmons and be with consistent shooters, and shooters that can kind of compete defensively. Well, not Seth Curry, but like Danny Green. But I think it's a little bit of everything outside of Rivers and Morey. Morey made those deals, so Morey too. But I definitely think them being healthy is the biggest factor.
Zion, I wanted to get your thoughts on another narrative that's been going on, I would say this season more prominently. It's been happening for years, but I feel like it's more in the spotlight. That's with the older generation and the younger generation. I'm sure you caught the Shaquille interview with Donovan Mitchell, and then just Shaq with just JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard, and I get overall just inside the NBA in terms of, I guess, them feeling like they have to mentor other players, and just compared to like with Anthony Davis, with him dealing with LeBron, just there's like very, very much like a mentor like apprenticeship relationship between those two. I guess how do you feel about just, I guess, the old heads like Barkley and Shaq just dealing with like brutal honesty, and kind of the younger players just being, lack of a better term, pissed off by the way they're phrasing it? Do you think like the older generation just has a right to say that, or do you think that like Shaq and Charles Barkley should choose their words more carefully?
I think it's a little bit of both, not to be a cop out. I mean, Shaq, Shaq does have this reputation of kind of, being unnecessarily, what's the word, brutal towards players, I feel like. I mean, even specifically with the Donovan Mitchell thing, I mean, that was kind of, from my point of view, that was kind of unnecessary, just not needed. I mean, I didn't think the approach he took was the correct way of kind of doing that in a way. But if your goal was to motivate him, but I do think it's a lot of, it's the disconnect between the generations. Obviously, I feel like my generation, I think I'm in the Donovan Mitchell generation because we are younger that way. But I think we just react to things differently than they would have reacted to things when they played. So I think it's kind of their Charles and Shaq's ignorance of how the younger generation reacts to things nowadays is what kind of plays into that. And I mean, I think in all honesty, sometimes it's them just hating. Shaq is one to take things a little personally and sensitive. He likes reminding people of his greatness and how good he was. But sometimes he tries to make it a lot about himself, where it's not really it doesn't have to be about him. I mean, Gobert, his little thing with Gobert was a little bit unnecessary too, I feel like, but I mean, he wasn't wrong. I don't think he was wrong. Like, for me, I think Gobert has still a lot to prove in his game, even though he is 28 and the Defense Player of the Year. I'm not totally convinced with Rudy Gobert, but sometimes you just don't need to say it. And I don't think Shaq and Chuck really care, though. They don't have a filter. So I think they're just going to continue being them and just live with the results.
I agree. Zion, does it change your perception of those players' legacies at all? I mean, not certainly what they did on the court, but how does it kind of shape your mind when you think back to like Barkley and Shaq in their playing days?
I mean, Shaq is still one of my favorite players of all time. I said the other day on a podcast, like me and Kobe kind of introduced me to the game of basketball. So like, I don't think I'm ever gonna, mix Shaq the announcer compared to Shaq the player. The same thing goes for Chuck. I don't think, I'm able to separate their two careers, even though I do think Chuck, the ring bites at him, not having a ring bites at him, and he shows it in his second career as an announcer. But I don't think I'll ever like mix those two stages of their life together.
For sure.
Well, Zion, thank you very much for joining the show. Please share where our listeners can find you on social media, and then what you're up to in terms of projects, and you're plugging your podcast and anything else you're doing in the new year this year.
Everyone can follow me at ZION OLOJEDE on Twitter. I mean, Instagram too, if you want. I don't really use Instagram, only every now and then. But yeah, check me out on the Complex Sports Podcast. We've had a lot of great guests. We just had Anthony Davis on. We got Tyler Hero coming up. And we've had a lot great guests in the past too to go back on, like Lamar Jackson, just a lot of basketball legends. So definitely check us out on there. Subscribe. We definitely appreciate when people reach out to us about it. But yeah, I mean, I'm a Duke fan. I got a lot of Duke shows on the way. So if you want to connect with me about Duke basketball too, holler at me. But yeah, I definitely appreciate y'all for having me on.
And thanks for coming on the show, Zion. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Appreciate y'all.
Thank you, Zion. Have a good one.
You too.